All right, Joel Gausten here from joelgausten.com. For this conversation, I'm joined by somebody I've had the pleasure of interviewing a few times over the years, but this is the first time he's joining me for this podcast. So I'm really thrilled to welcome from Nashville, Tennessee, Mr. John Corabi. John, good to see you, brother. How you been?
I'm good, buddy. How you doing? And obviously, if you've interviewed me a few times, you still haven't learned your lesson.
No, man, I'm psyched to connect with you, especially right now. There's a lot of cool stuff going on with you. The main thing on top of the tree is you've got an album coming out on April 24th on Frontiers called New Day. It's a John Corabi solo record. And I gotta tell you, it's funny. When I got the record here, I thought, oh, cool, another Corabi record, because you've been on so many records that in my mind I thought you've done a ton of solo stuff, but it dawned on me this is really only your second or third solo release. I know you did the acoustic one, you did the Motley Live thing a couple of years ago, but
Mhm.
if I'm not mistaken, this is your first real, you know, all original material studio under the
W-
Karate name.
Yeah, with other. I mean, when we did the acoustic record, there was some new material on that, about 60%. But we didn't use any keyboards, no drums. It was all percussion, very low key. But so this is my first with all new material, full band, full bore, turn it up and let's go. You know what I mean? Record. So I
Yeah.
guess you could say it's my first.
Well, I mean, it kind of begs an obvious first question in that why now, after 30 plus years in the game, was it the perfect storm to put out a record like this?
Well, I mean, yeah, there's obviously the Daisies were taking a year off, or so they said, um, taking a year off. So I was like, okay, this is great. I got plenty of time to do this now. I can do finish the record, go on tour, promote it. And so, I mean, it just kind of worked out that way. But it's for the most part, like even the Live 94 record, I recorded that one in 2014
Hmm.
and didn't put it out until 2018 only because I was so busy with the Daisies. Like every time I thought I had a slot where I could put the record out and not interfere with anything they were doing, I suddenly found out I didn't have that slot. So I didn't release that till 4 years later. But it's funny. I didn't realize it, but like this record is really like my 19th or 20th record, since I started with the Scream. Um, so I've been kind of busy to a degree, you know what I mean? Between touring and writing new music and recording and whatever. So uh, this was my first window where I had like a year off.
Yeah, very cool. And I'm lucky I've got the record here, and I've been playing it for a couple weeks now. And let me just preface it by saying, bro, I mean, I've been listening to your work since that first Scream record. I remember when that was the new thing, right? So
Yeah.
I've been with you a long time. I gotta tell you, hand on heart, it's the best fucking thing you've ever done.
You know what's funny? My wife, now she's a little biased, but she even said it like I got to be honest with you. Like I was a little worried when I put the first single out, New Day, which came in December.
Right.
And, I don't normally pay much mind to comments on YouTube or any of the things, whatever. But a few people were like, oh man, I was really kind of hoping it'd be a little heavier. Like the Motley record, not my cup of tea. And I was like, uh-oh. Uh, but my wife even said, she goes, you know what? Like, this is probably the most honest John Corabi record that you've ever done. I think lyrically, it's your best work. Um, and she goes, don't pay mind to the comments. You may lose a few fans along the way that want something heavier, but I think this record will set you up where you'll get 10 new fans for every fan you lose. So I was like, all right, cool. And then I just said, you know what? I'm not going to read the comments anymore. I'm done. Whatever. But I love this record, bro. Like, it's again, it's not real heavy, but it's just the style of music that I grew up listening to, and I love it.
Yeah, man. Same here. I mean, when I listened to it for the first time, it reminded me of being that little kid who was listening to Aerosmith's 70s era the first time, or Humble Pie, or
Hmm.
Cheap Trick, Badfinger, the list goes on. I'm like, man. And yeah, obviously the Motley record's always going to be in the mix, right?
Right.
This opinion, if I put my journo hat on for a minute, my critic hat, I think this record transcends that era. You're going back to the real stuff, man. I mean, you're going back to that 70s root sound with this record, and it sounds fantastic.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, I mean, my parents actually, when I got the Motley gig, asked for their fucking money back. But I went to Catholic school, and I would cut, like everybody else, I would cut classes, and I just remember sitting in the little corner store in Philadelphia, playing a pinball machine, popping quarters in a jukebox when you could get 5 songs for a quarter. And, you know, I grew up on like the Guess Who,
Right.
Three Dog Night, um, yeah, Zeppelin, and, but Credence was a huge part of my, and it was funny, like the first band that I was ever in, the first song we ever learned was Traveling Band by Credence. Uh, so this was just me going back to what I kind of feel was a very creative, eclectic era of rock music. And I've said it a million times, I'll say it again. There will never be another 15 years of music like when from the time the Beatles did Rubber Soul
Mm,
to 1980. So from 65 to 80, that era is what I grew up listening to. And that's where you had Creedence, The Who, The Beatles, The Stones, Zeppelin, Hendrix, Janis Joplin, The Doors, just it's such an eclectic variation of music. And I just said, I want to get back to that. I want to go back and revisit that era. And the other thing, as you know, most bands put music out now, whether it's a single or an album, and immediately the suits, they try to figure out what box it belongs in.
right.
Is this rock, classic rock, grunge rock, metal? Like, and that was the beauty of the music we grew up listening to in our youth was, to me, those bands that I just mentioned, all those bands, they had the freedom to be creative, and it wasn't unusual for, everybody says the Stones are the greatest rock and roll band on earth, and it wasn't unusual for them to do something like Dead Flowers, I'm
Right.
Just Waiting on a Friend, Honky Tonk Woman. I mean, the list goes on and on. Where nowadays those songs would be considered country songs,
Right. Right.
and I'm like, just right. And let's get back to the basics. So, Marty was very instrumental in making this happen with me. And when we got all done, we sat and we listened to the record. And even Marty's like, dude, I've worked on a lot of records in my life, but I fucking love this record. It's just honest.
Yeah. And Marty, of course, is the great Marty Fredrickson.
Yeah.
Big name in the game, has been around a long time, knows his stuff. And I agree. I think the combination of you guys together working on this thing really, really gelled. And I can't say enough about how much I love the record. I definitely wanted to get into a couple of particular tracks with you. I mean, we
Okay.
can we can do a 10-hour conversation on this record. I know neither of us have the time, but um, going back to what I was saying earlier, when I was a kid discovering that 70s stuff, there are definitely songs that stay out in my mind that still give me goosebumps. Badfinger, Day After Day.
Oh yeah.
Right. Seasons of Wither, right? I mean,
Hmm.
those are the songs. I gotta tell you, man, I would put Faith, Hope, and Love on that list too, off this new record. I mean, the second I heard that song, it brought me back to that time, man. So, number one, thank you for that. And tell me a little bit about making that song possible because it's a really powerful tune, and might not be something a John Corabi fan or even a Daisies fan would expect from you.
Well, but the thing of it is, you listen to again. I just go back and I look at bands like even Zeppelin. Zeppelin, their first two records were just a kick in the teeth, and then they took a complete left turn and did the third record, which was more acoustic than anything, and it kind of turned some people off. But I just love those bands where you would put the needle down on the vinyl. I'm giving my age away, but you'd put the needle down on the vinyl and you would hear Black Dog. And then in that little gap in between songs, you had no idea what was coming next. And, Zeppelin to be able to do something like Since I've Been Loving You, you know what I mean? Which was one of my favorite Zeppelin tunes. So when we were putting the song together, I kind of started working on like this bluesy, had maybe a little bit of an R&B vibe to it, but more bluesy than anything. And so we kind of tracked it, and I came home, and like I was just sitting there a bit discouraged, obviously. I'm sure, like everybody else, you're just being inundated all day long with bad news. And I just sat there and I thought about it. I'm like, man, we've never been more divided. Uh, my wife is a bit younger than me again. So she's like, man, we've never been this divided. I go, well, I kind of remember a time when we were, and that was during the Vietnam War. And I just sat down and I just was like, man, I wish people realize that it takes the same amount of effort to be angry with your neighbor as it does to be understanding with your neighbor. And, uh, I just said, you know what? I just put pen to paper and I just was like, these are my thoughts. These are my feelings on, you know, how to treat people. And it's like my parents always said, treat everybody as you would want to be treated yourself. And that's all that song's about. It's like, come on, people, wake up. Like, you know what I mean? Uh, and it just worked. And that was one of the ones, you know, a lot of people have asked me how Charlie Starr got involved. I, I've been a huge fan of Charlie's playing and his songwriting for whatever. So I just reached out to Charlie Starr and I go, hey, dude, how much would you charge to play on a track? And I wanted Charlie to play on that song.
Mm.
And um, he was so sweet about it. Like he goes, well, let me hear the track. So I sent him all the tracks with the vocals, all that stuff. And I don't know how long the track is, maybe 6 minutes, but like 7 minutes later, he wrote me back and he goes, bro, I fucking love this song. I'd be honored to play guitar on it for you. And like, and then obviously he just nailed the guitar work on that, all that intro and the solos, and it's just brilliant. So it just worked.
Yeah, and you mentioned about, the sort of the positive vibe of that song. I mean, there's a positive vibe to the whole record. And to your point, looking back, I wasn't around then, but looking back at like the late 60s, early 70s, the world was on fire. But in the midst of that, you had John Lennon doing Imagine. You know what I mean? It's like music's always going to serve that purpose, hopefully, you know, where we can see some light in all this stuff we're dealing with every day.
Yeah, and it was again that era of music. you had the Vietnam War, so you had half the country that was in support of it, the other half was not.
Mm.
And, so you had these, the Kent State rally where four students were killed, and Vietnam War protests. But the music also uh, was a voice of that generation. You had Credence writing songs like Fortunate Son, and or Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young writing the song Ohio after that whole incident. So that was it was I hate being political, especially in this current nowadays or climate, but I just wanted to just say, like, hey man, here's a song and this is what I think, and you know maybe you can apply this to your everyday thought process. But again, buddy, I'm like so into the lyrics of this record and the music. I'm just stoked.
Yeah, yeah. Tell me about Laurel, because that was another song that just like, whoa, really just stopped me in my tracks.
You know what? It's funny. Laurel came about because uh, just prior to doing the record, my wife. I'm sorry, I keep bringing my wife up. Again, my wife's a bit younger than me, and I'm a bit of a music. Even though I'm blessed to be able to put records out, I'm still a bit of a music nerd. So she'll hear a song and she's like, "Oh, who's that? Oh, that's Deep Purple from the Burn record, Sail Away."
Hmm.
And she's like, "Oh man, I love this." And then I start getting into the nerdy shit with her, like telling her, "Okay, well, they had this guy sang Hush, and then Ian Gillan came in, and they made all these changes." So she always says, "Damn it, I was born like 10 years too late." Well, I watched this documentary just prior to doing the record, and it was called Echoes in the Canyon.
Mm.
Uh, I highly recommend watching it if you're into that, but it's the history of Laurel Canyon in LA and how the Doors and the Mamas and Papas and the Monkees and uh, Frank Zappa and all these different people lived in that bohemian community, and they just told these crazy stories of how they left their doors open. And what's his name, Graham Nash, was telling a story that, yeah, he goes, "Man, I went to bed one night at like 10 o'clock at night," and he goes, "About 2 in the morning I felt somebody sitting on the end of my bed." And he goes, "I turned the light on. It was George Harrison rolling a joint, going, 'Hey, dude, you want to smoke and jam?'" And it was just like this crazy bohemian whatever. And I just sat down and I thought, like, God, that's just sounds like I was born 10 years too late.
Mm.
Like I would have been in that little community if I was born 10 years earlier, went out to LA 10 years earlier, whatever. Uh, so I, I was just so inspired by that whole TV series that I just sat down and I wrote this. A few people thought it was about a woman, but it's just about the tales. If Laurel Canyon could talk, it's about the tales of the things that Laurel Canyon has seen over the years. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a gorgeous song, really is. Really.
Thank you.
Sticking with the idea of the sounds on this record and the vibe you were going for, um, it being what I would call not necessarily classic rock, but a classic sounding rock record, let me take a long walk to a question. I may have even mentioned this to you the last time we talked, but when I was a real kid, like kid, I used to intern at a radio station in New Jersey. And I remember when that first Scream album turned up, and everybody at the station was like, holy shit, this record's gonna fucking explode. And then something else exploded, right? Grunge
Yeah.
exploded, everything changed. Then comes the Motley record for you, 94. Not the most hospitable time for an 80s era rock band. Um, but the point I'm going to is it's 2026, and a lot of the music that was supposed to be the next big thing had its moment, went away. A lot of those guys are still playing, but they're not filling stadiums like they were 30 years ago.
Right.
But there's something about the meat and potatoes classic rock sound that has never gone away. I would certainly put you in a modern context in that vibe. What do you think it is about this style of music, this traditional style of music that still has a seat at the table all these years later, where, we're talking about the 70s, almost half a century later, that influence is still as strong today as it was, Christ, even then.
It's just to me, uh, when you look at the Beatles, Stones, The Who, and then I'll go even the second generation, you start taking bands like Zeppelin, Deep Purple, uh, Alice Cooper, Bowie. These guys took that original format and just kind of in that era. I can't explain it, but to me, all these bands that I just mentioned are the originators. That's where it started. Uh, you know, say what you want, will, about, you know, guys like, and I loved Eddie Van Halen, but if it wasn't for Hendrix, would there be a Eddie Van Halen? Do you know what I mean? So, like, as much as I love Soundgarden, in that whole grunge era, like I always looked at Soundgarden as like an amazing band, but they were taking things that I could be way off base on this, but to me, Soundgarden was like a mixture of Sabbath with like Beatles harmonies and stuff and Beatles melodies. Uh, so all of these bands, Alice in Chains, all these bands that came later, I feel were like dipping their toes. They were mimicking what the originators did. Um, you know, uh, it's funny. Later today, I have an interview, and they were talking about if I could give my favorite, uh, what I considered metal, like the beginning of metal, and I go hands down to me, like the two bands that I would say started really kind of kicked heavy metal off was obviously Sabbath.
Right.
Sabbath was just I, that was like, what am I listening to right now? And I had the good fortune of seeing them a few times, the original version back in the day, Masters of Reality and Volume 4 and like all, I was like, holy shit, these guys are heavy. But also the first few records of a band like Grand Funk Railroad.
Right.
I like prior to them getting a keyboard player and really becoming like this polished, song-oriented band that they became in the beginning, they were fucking heavy. They were like riff heavy, uh, and it was just something you had never heard before. So I always go back to that era and I go, that stuff is going to last because it was the original version of it all. And I'll use another example. I apologize for the length of my answers. I get into an argument with my second ex wife, and this was right around the time that Marilyn Manson was just blowing up. You know what I mean? And she was like, "Oh my God, he's so original." Da, 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 da. And I go, "Yeah, I love Marilyn Manson. Marilyn Manson was a rock star in that moment."
Yeah.
But I go, originality, I, I'm not sure. And we got to do it. I mean, she was just vicious. She was like, you're just pissed off. Like, you're irrelevant now. And I'm like, maybe. Anyway, after we got through that argument, I told her, I said, to me, Marilyn Manson is nothing more than Bowie, Alice Cooper for the shock rock, and Trent Reznor, Nine Inch Nails. Put the three of them together, that's Marilyn Manson. And she just argued with me, blah, 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 whatever. So IFC Network, the independent film channel, they had filmed, there's a film about it. It's the last show that David Bowie did as Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. And I dare anybody, the next time you go see that, if you see that movie, watch it. David Bowie's backdrop is a giant circle with that arrow that goes like this that Marilyn Manson was using as a logo for a while.
Mm.
So I called my ex-wife in and I said, I paused, I paused the show. I go, this is David Bowie in like 1973. What do you see? And she's just looking at it. She's like, you know, I go, look at the fucking backdrop. And she goes, that's Marilyn Manson's logo. I go, that's my point. There is nothing original anymore. I'm sorry. I don't give a shit who it is. Oasis, it's a rehash of the Beatles. You know what I mean? Black Crows, I love the Black Crows, but it's like old faces, humble pie, you know. So I go, nothing, I'm not doing anything original. I'm just rehashing the shit that I grew up listening to. So there's nothing original anymore, period. I don't care who it is. So I always go back to that era of music because back then, Deep Purple, Sabbath, Yes, Jethro Tull, they were the originators. They were the ones that started it all.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Well, I really got to say again, this record, New Day, carries on that tradition. It's a pleasure listening to it. It's a pleasure reconnecting with you. And I know you've got a million plates spinning as always. So I'll let you get on with it. But in the meantime, man, congratulations on the album. Again, for the viewer, it comes out April 24th on Frontiers. It's called New Day. Check it out. This video will have all the relevant links and what have you for people to do that. And John, good talking to you again as always.
You too, buddy. Keep waving the flag, bro.
Absolutely. Look forward to the next time, bro.
I hope so.
Take care.
See ya.